My name is Michael Walker. I used to believe life was a puzzle you could solve if only you stared hard enough at the pieces. But I've learned that sometimes, no matter how carefully you arrange the fragments, the picture you get is not the one you expected. I met Olivia 10 years ago at a small tech conference in Portland. She was confident, articulate, and had a spark that cut through the noise of the room. I was a mid-level software developer then, buried in back-end systems and code audits. She worked in marketing. I still remember how she laughed at one of my dry, nerdy jokes. Genuinely laughed. We married a year later. Fast, maybe, but it felt right. Our life together was, by most standards, successful. We bought a modest house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. I got promoted to senior developer. She launched her own digital agency. Dinners were filled with wine, laughter, and the occasional debate over whether to adopt a dog or a cat. But happiness is a deceptive thing. It has a way of muting red flags until they become sirens. It started with the silences. Olivia, once bubbly and expressive, became distant. Her phone, which had once been carelessly left on counters and nightstands, now never left her side. Locked screens, whispered texts in the kitchen, business trips that seemed oddly timed. I try not to jump to conclusions. She was under stress. Her agency had landed a major client, and she was working late, managing deadlines. That's what I told myself night after night while I sat alone at the dinner table, her plate growing cold. But one night, as I reached for her phone to check the time, she snatched it from the table like it was a ticking bomb. Our eyes met. Something in hers was gone. That was the night I knew. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I became quiet, methodical. I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. I tracked her moods, watched her leave the house dressed just a little too perfectly for client meetings. I noticed a name that came up too often, Chris. Chris was apparently a consultant working with her firm. He liked coffee with oat milk, drove a Tesla, and once attended Burning Man. She mentioned him casually, always in passing. But the way she said his name, it clung to her voice like a secret. I created a new email account, something anonymous. I hired a private investigator. I felt like a stranger in my own home, sharing a bed with someone whose dreams no longer included me. 2 weeks later, I got the report. Photos, restaurant receipts. A weekend trip she said was for a seminar in San Francisco was actually a getaway to a wine resort in Napa Valley with Chris. There was a timestamp picture of them holding hands by a vineyard. I stared at that photo for hours. My heart didn't break, it calcified. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Revenge, I realized, wasn't always about yelling or slamming doors. It could be a performance. A calculated, patient play. So I smiled. The days that followed were surreal. Everything felt normal, at least on the surface. Olivia and I still ate dinner together, still exchanged pleasantries in the morning, still went through the motions. But in the back of my mind, I was already planning the steps to my revenge. Revenge doesn't need to be a whirlwind. It doesn't need to be a dramatic confrontation. It can be subtle, slow, like the quiet erosion of a cliffside. I would dismantle everything she thought she knew, piece by piece. I started with the things I knew best, technology. I began using my skills to monitor her, just enough to stay in the shadows, invisible. I hacked into her work email, set up a few alerts to monitor her movements. She had no idea that I could see when she was staying late at the office or when she'd scheduled meetings with Chris. The digital trail she left was her undoing. I could pinpoint everything, the places, the conversations, the lies. But there was one piece I hadn't accounted for, how quickly she would become aware of her own duplicity. It started with her forgetting to log out of her email on our shared computer. I found a conversation between her and Chris that sent chills down my spine. It was a thread of emails, each more intimate than the last. The language wasn't just about business. It was flirtation, wrapped in the veneer of professionalism. She wrote, "I can't stop thinking about you, Chris. I know we shouldn't, but when I'm with you, I forget about everything else." The email was dated just a few days before our wedding anniversary. The anger that bubbled inside me wasn't just about betrayal. It was about how she had been lying to me, right in front of my face. The trust we had built, shattered. The years we had spent together, all for nothing. But instead of confrontation, I focused on getting closer. I started doing things that would give me the upper hand. I kept pretending to be the loving husband, making her believe everything was fine. I became the perfect man she thought she was still married to. I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer, started looking at financial records, and in my spare time, I researched how to break her down. I couldn't act impulsively. I had to make sure that when I made my move, it would be devastating. As the weeks passed, I could see how the weight of her own guilt began to wear on Olivia. She wasn't as carefree as she once was. I noticed her pulling back even more, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting when we were alone. But there was one thing I didn't anticipate. Her increasing distance also made her more unpredictable. She stopped trying to hide things so carefully. The phone, once guarded like a fortress, was now left unlocked when she took a shower. She would leave the house early, not bothering to hide it. The sudden carelessness became part of her facade of power. It was as though she thought I would never dare to confront her. But that made my plans even more dangerous. Every conversation we had in those weeks was underlined by a growing tension. There were the awkward silences, the subtle jabs at each other, the offhand comments that cut deeper than intended. Olivia would look at me, and I could see the guilt flicker in her eyes, but she wouldn't say a word. She had already moved on, and she was hoping I would do the same. Yet, every time she left for one of her business meetings, I followed her. It wasn't the same as before. This wasn't a wild, impulsive betrayal. This was planned, methodical. I knew where she was going. I knew who she was meeting. But what I didn't expect was the increasing paranoia creeping into her eyes. Olivia had always been in control of everything, her business, her friends, her secrets. But she was losing her grip on me. She started leaving little hints, odd comments that, at first, I thought were random. She mentioned how life was so much more exciting with a little bit of mystery, or how sometimes we all need a fresh start. I began to wonder if she knew I knew. And that's when I made my next move. The idea that Olivia might know what I was doing never fully left my mind, but I needed more proof. If she was aware of my suspicions, I couldn't let her have the upper hand. I had to stay one step ahead. I followed her one evening after she had been acting distant for several days. She told me she was going to a late meeting with a client. I had heard the story before, but this time something felt different. Her unease was palpable, and that was my opening. I waited until she left the house and then followed her. It was almost midnight, and the streets of our neighborhood in San Francisco were eerily quiet. I kept my distance as I watched her car pull into the parking lot of a small, upscale cafe. I parked a few blocks away and waited. I couldn't risk being seen, but I needed to know for sure. As I sat in the car, the cold seeping into my bones, I watched her walk inside, her figure blending into the shadows of the cafe's outdoor seating area. Then, a few minutes later, he showed up. Chris. My heart twisted as I watched them greet each other. It was as if nothing had changed between them. He pulled her into an embrace, and they kissed, briefly, but enough for me to see the truth. She wasn't just meeting him for business. They didn't even try to hide it. They were in love. The way Chris held her, the way she smiled at him, it was everything I had lost in our relationship. It was everything I could never be to her anymore. The depth of their connection was undeniable, and it shattered something deep inside me. But I wasn't angry, not in the way I thought I would be. Instead, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I didn't need to confront her yet. I would keep pretending. I would play my part. I sat there for hours, watching them talk, watching them laugh, watching them. What? Plan their future? Discuss the details of their affair. The thought of it consumed me. Finally, they left together. As they walked to Chris's car, I felt an irrational pang of jealousy stab at me. I knew I was better than him in so many ways, but the sight of them together made me feel small. They drove off, and I followed them from a distance. They didn't go back to her apartment. No, they drove to an upscale hotel on the outskirts of the city. I parked my car across the street and waited as they entered the building. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to confront them both right then, but I didn't. That would have been too easy, too quick. They would just deny it, and I'd be left with nothing. No, I was going to make them feel the weight of their actions. I was going to make sure Olivia understood that this wasn't something she could hide forever. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I had to plan. The next few days felt like a blur. The tension between us was thick, almost unbearable. Olivia didn't suspect that I knew, but I could tell she was beginning to feel the pressure of her own guilt. Her actions became erratic. She tried to make up for the distance by being overly affectionate one minute, distant the next. She would linger in the kitchen longer than necessary, making small talk about nothing important, avoiding any real conversations. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. I was playing my game, and I was getting better at it. The next time Olivia left for a meeting, I decided to take action. I went through her things, her phone, her laptop, the little details she thought were well hidden. I knew she wouldn't have left a direct trail, but people are creatures of habit. There were patterns, even in the way she deleted her messages, even in the places she frequented. I found what I was looking for. Hidden under a folder named Financials on her laptop was a document with the title Plans for the Future. I opened it, and what I found nearly made me laugh out loud. It was a list of everything she had been planning for her future with Chris. It outlined trips they were going to take together, their future plans for buying a home in the city, and even the steps she was planning to take to move her life forward without me. Her betrayal was right there, in black and white. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-on replacement. She had already decided to leave me, and Chris was her way out. That was the moment everything shifted. I was no longer just a betrayed husband. I was a man who had been completely replaced, and I would make sure Olivia felt the consequences of her decisions. As the days passed, I became increasingly methodical. The initial rush of anger I had felt began to settle into something colder, something far more calculating. I had always prided myself on my ability to remain in control, and now more than ever, I needed that control. Olivia thought she had the upper hand. She thought she could play this game without consequences. But she was wrong. I started following her more frequently, learning her routine, discovering the places she went when she thought I wasn't watching. There were more secret meetings with Chris, more late-night getaways, more whispered conversations on the phone when she thought I wasn't paying attention. But I wasn't just observing anymore. I was collecting information, learning everything about their affair, memorizing every little detail. Olivia had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. One night, as I watched them leave another hotel together, I realized I had everything I needed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back what was mine, my life, my dignity, my control. If Olivia thought she could walk away from our marriage without consequences, she was in for a rude awakening. I returned to the house that evening, my mind racing with possibilities. What would I do with the evidence I had gathered? Should I confront her directly, or should I bide my time? One thing was clear. I needed to make sure she felt the full weight of her actions, and I wasn't about to let her off easy. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, thinking of everything I had discovered. Olivia's betrayal was more than just an affair. It was a complete betrayal of everything we had built together. All the years we had spent as a family, all the love I thought we had shared, meant nothing to her. She had already moved on emotionally, if not physically. And yet, she continued to act like nothing had changed, like I wouldn't notice the lies she was weaving. I had been a fool, a complacent fool, but no more. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going to take back control. I was going to make sure Olivia understood just how deeply her actions had cut. She would regret this. She would regret everything. I didn't want to burn bridges just yet, not entirely. I had to be strategic. I needed to get into the head of Olivia and Chris. I needed to break them down piece by piece. So I started making plans. I would get close to Chris, not through confrontation, but through subtle manipulation. He didn't know me well, but I knew how to play the game. I knew how to use people's weaknesses to my advantage. Over the next few days, I worked on getting into Chris's orbit. I had met him a few times before, at family gatherings and social events, but we had never really talked. Now, I needed him to trust me, to believe that I was just another guy who had been hurt by Olivia's betrayal. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way to get close enough to strike. I started running into him at places I knew he frequented, the local bar, the coffee shop down the street, and even at the gym. Each encounter was carefully orchestrated. I made sure I was casual, friendly, and empathetic. I knew how to play the part of the heartbroken husband, the guy who was trying to put his life back together after everything had fallen apart. At first, Chris didn't seem to pick up on the subtle hints I was dropping. He just assumed I was someone who had been hurt, like so many others. But I knew that if I kept pushing, if I kept showing him just how much Olivia's actions had affected me, he would begin to lower his guard. It took a few weeks, but eventually it worked. Chris and I started talking more. He opened up to me about his own frustrations, about the secrets he and Olivia were keeping. He didn't know it, but he was walking right into my trap. I played my part perfectly, offering support and sympathy. I made him believe I was just another guy who had been taken advantage of by Olivia. Little by little, he started to open up more, to reveal things about their affair that he had never shared with anyone. And I listened. I listened carefully, storing every piece of information away for later. Every detail he shared about Olivia's plans, every confession he made about their relationship, it all served my greater purpose. I could feel the walls of their secret world starting to crumble. Chris had become a pawn in my game. He didn't even know it yet. Olivia's betrayal was no longer just about her. It was about me taking back what was mine. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I had worked for without making her pay the price. But as I prepared to make my next move, a new wave of doubt crept into my mind. Was I doing the right thing? Was this the path I should be taking? It wasn't just Olivia I was playing with anymore. Chris had become a part of this twisted game, and the more I learned about him, the more I realized I had underestimated just how far people would go for love and for revenge. But it was too late to turn back now. I had made my choice. I was already too deep into this web of lies, manipulation, and deceit, and I would make sure Olivia and Chris felt every inch of it. As the days passed, the tension between Olivia and me continued to mount. I could feel it in the air every time we shared a room, every time she glanced at me with that hollow look in her eyes. She knew what was coming. She could feel it too. But she had no idea just how far I was willing to go to make her feel the weight of her choices. Chris had become a tool in my game, but even now, as I observed him, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pity. He didn't deserve what was coming. I had no ill will toward him, not really, but he was part of the picture, and that meant he would have to be dealt with. He had made his bed with Olivia, and now he was going to lie in it. I knew that Olivia's facade was crumbling. The cracks were becoming visible, but I wasn't going to let her off easy. Not when she had so effortlessly dismantled everything I had believed in. My emotions had long since turned cold, and now everything I did was calculated, strategic, designed to bring about the outcome I wanted. I began to put the final pieces of my plan in motion. The pieces were slowly falling into place. I had spent weeks talking to Chris, gaining his trust, listening to his concerns, and all the while, I had been gathering the ammunition I needed to take down Olivia and her lover. I had become so good at pretending to be the grieving husband, the man who had lost everything, that I almost fooled myself. The hurt had long since been replaced by something darker, something more dangerous. It wasn't about healing anymore. It was about justice, about making sure they paid for their betrayal. I kept pushing Chris to open up, to reveal more about his relationship with Olivia. Slowly, he started to slip. His guard lowered, and he began telling me things I knew he would regret. Olivia wasn't just sleeping with him. She was planning a future with him, a future that didn't include me, didn't include the family we had built together. They had talked about marriage, about living together. They had planned to leave me behind as if I were some insignificant part of her past. Each revelation hurt, but it also gave me the clarity I needed. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was a player in a game that would leave Olivia broken, just as she had broken me. She thought she could walk away from everything we had built. but I was going to make sure she never forgot what she had thrown away. As I pushed forward, I began to take a more direct approach. The secrets I had learned about Olivia and Chris were like a weapon in my hands, and now I was ready to use them. The next step was clear. Confront Olivia. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with cold, calculated precision. I would show her that I knew everything. I would force her to look me in the eye and understand that she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. The day I decided to confront her, I felt an odd sense of calm. It wasn't like the rage I had felt before. No, this was something different. It was as if a part of me had detached, as if I were watching this all unfold from a distance, detached from the emotions that had once controlled me. When Olivia walked into the house that evening, she immediately noticed the change. I wasn't sitting on the couch pretending to watch TV. I wasn't sulking in the corner, waiting for her to say something. No, I was standing by the door, my eyes locked on hers, my expression unreadable. "What is it, Michael?" she asked, her voice dripping with that false sweetness she had perfected over the years. "You look like you're about to explode." I didn't answer at first. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of photos I had been collecting. Photos of her and Chris, their secret meetings, their stolen moments. I laid them out on the table in front of her, one by one. Her face turned pale as she realized what I had. For the first time in weeks, I saw something real in her eyes, a flicker of fear. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Does it matter?" I replied coldly, my voice steady. "I know everything, Olivia. I know about you and Chris. I know about your plans, your lies, everything. You thought you could keep this from me, but I was always watching. I was always listening." She took a step back, her hand shaking as she reached for her phone. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to regain some semblance of control. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "Don't lie to me, Olivia. It's over. This charade, this marriage, it's done. You've made your choice." Her face twisted with anger, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had once loved. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. "You can't do this to me, Michael," she spat. "You don't get to control my life anymore." "I'm done." I stood there, unmoving. "No, Olivia, you're not done. Not yet. You've hurt me, you've betrayed me, and now it's time to pay the price. You'll regret everything. I'm not going to let you walk away from this without consequences." Olivia's defiance faded as the realization sank in. She was trapped, and there was nowhere to run. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was the one who was powerless. I had taken back the control she had stolen from me, and now I was going to make sure she would never forget it. The confrontation wasn't over yet, though. Olivia had one final trick up her sleeve, a last-ditch effort to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty for what I was doing. She tried to play the victim, but I saw through it immediately. She had lost her power over me. She wasn't the woman I had married anymore. She was just someone who had destroyed everything we had. I left her standing there, with nothing but the weight of her own lies to bear. She wouldn't be able to escape this. Not now. Not ever. Days passed after that confrontation, but Olivia didn't leave. She lingered, as if waiting for some miracle to happen, some way to fix the broken pieces of what we had once shared. But there was no fixing this. No magic words, no grand gestures, no tearful apologies could undo the damage she had done. I knew it, and deep down, she knew it too. Her presence in the house was a reminder of everything she had destroyed. Each passing hour felt like a countdown, ticking away the time until the final chapter of our story would unfold. I stayed silent most of the time, my mind working in overdrive. My plan was almost complete. I could feel the final pieces falling into place. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. One more confrontation, one final showdown that would leave Olivia with no escape. She needed to know without a doubt that there was no room for her in my life anymore. The day came when I decided it was time for the final step. I had prepared myself for this moment, steeling my nerves and calming the storm inside me. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I had spent far too long being the victim in this story. Now, I was the one writing the ending. I called Olivia into the living room, my voice calm, even detached. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, and now it was finally happening. She walked in, her eyes still searching mine for any sign of weakness. But she wouldn't find any. I had no intention of letting her off the hook. "I need you to listen to me, Olivia," I said, my tone steady and clear. "I'm done. I'm done with the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. You've made your choice, and now you'll have to live with it. I don't want to hear your excuses, and I don't want to listen to your tears. This is it. This is the end." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "No, you don't get to talk anymore. You've said everything you needed to say. You've made your bed, and now you'll lie in it." Olivia stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, I saw the woman she used to be, the woman I had once loved, flicker in her gaze. But that woman was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating woman who had betrayed me. "You think this is easy for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You think I don't regret what I've done?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "I don't care about your regrets, Olivia. Regret won't fix what you've done. It won't fix the damage you've caused to this family. You had a choice, and you chose to betray me. You chose to betray everything we built together." Her face twisted with frustration, and I could see the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You don't get to control me, Michael," she spat. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore." I shook my head, the bitterness in my smile cutting through the tension in the air. "No, Olivia, I don't control you, but I control the outcome of this. And believe me when I say this, you won't walk away from this unscathed. You won't escape the consequences." Olivia's expression faltered, and I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she could manipulate me, thought she could still twist the situation to her advantage, but I had already seen through her. I'd already seen her for who she really was. "You think Chris is going to save you?" I asked, my voice dripping with disdain. "He's as much of a pawn in this game as you are. You're both just pieces in a much bigger picture." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied. "I've seen everything. I've heard everything. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." The room was silent, save for the sound of her labored breathing. I watched her closely, reading the emotions that flickered across her face. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of satisfaction. She was finally seeing the truth, my truth. She wasn't in control anymore. I was, and I wasn't going to let her walk away. "What do you want from me, Michael?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I want you to understand something," I said, stepping closer to her. "I want you to understand the damage you've done. I want you to understand that this is your fault. You ruined this. You destroyed everything we had. And now you'll have to live with that. But you won't do it alone. Because I'll make sure you never forget the consequences of your actions." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once would have. I didn't feel anything but the cold satisfaction of knowing that I was finally in control. "I'm not going to make this easy for you," I continued. "And I'm not going to let you run away and hide. You'll face what you've done, just like I've had to face it. You'll live with the guilt, with the knowledge that you've betrayed everyone who ever trusted you." She took a step back as if to retreat, but I grabbed her arm, holding her in place. "No, Olivia, you're not running anymore." "Not this time." I released her arm, watching as she took a shaky breath and wiped away her tears. For the first time, she seemed small, fragile, like a person who had realized the full weight of their mistakes. She wasn't the confident, manipulative woman I had once known. She was just a woman who had lost everything. The silence that followed was deafening. It felt as though the world had stopped spinning, as if all the noise of the past weeks had fallen away, leaving only the stark reality of what had happened. "I'm done with you," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the stillness. "I'm done with this marriage. I'm done with everything." Olivia's lips trembled, and for the first time, she seemed truly broken. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, her gaze falling to the floor. It was over. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. Olivia stood there, unable to speak, her eyes darting to the floor as if she could find some way to escape the harsh truth of my words. But there was no escaping this. There was no hiding from the consequences of her actions. I stared at her, watching as the last remnants of defiance drained from her. This was the final stage, the moment where she would either face the consequences of her betrayal or crumble beneath the weight of it. I was done with the games. I was done pretending that things could ever go back to what they once were. I hope you understand, I said, my voice steady but cold. This is the end. There's no turning back now. No more excuses. No more second chances. You've crossed the line, Olivia, and there's no coming back from that. She nodded silently, her eyes now swollen from the tears she had shed earlier. I could see the hurt in her gaze, but it was too little too late. She had had her chance to make things right, and she had thrown it away in the worst possible way. I won't fight you anymore, she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. I know it's over. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything finally settling in. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It all seemed to bleed away in that moment, leaving behind only a cold, empty void. It was a strange feeling, almost like relief. I had spent so long consumed by the pain, but now I felt free. Not because Olivia had apologized or because she had come to some grand realization, but because I was finally free of the chains that had bound me to her. Good, I said, my words clipped and final. You should have known that a long time ago. I turned my back on her, walking toward the door. I didn't need to look back to know that she was still standing there, broken and defeated. I had won. She had lost. The game was over. As I stepped out into the cold night, I felt the weight of everything finally lift. The world seemed different now, clearer, sharper. The air was colder, but it was refreshing, like a breath of fresh air after a long, suffocating ordeal. The city lights blinked in the distance, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely again. I had won, and Olivia had lost. The next few days were a blur of legal paperwork and phone calls, all of them necessary but dull. Olivia moved out of the house, taking only what little she had left, her clothes, a few personal items, and the memories of a marriage that had once seemed perfect. I didn't care about any of it. I didn't care about her things, her possessions, or the life we had built together. It was all gone, reduced to dust and regret. I focused on what came next, rebuilding my life piece by piece. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt cleaner. I didn't have to deal with the constant reminders of her betrayal. I didn't have to pretend that everything was okay when I knew it wasn't. The process of moving on was slow, but I was determined. I spent my days working, focusing on the things that mattered, my career, my future, the people who had supported me through all of this. They were the ones who mattered. They were the ones I could count on. Chris had disappeared from the scene after the fallout. I never saw him again, and I didn't care to. He had played his part in this twisted drama, and now he was just another casualty of Olivia's betrayal. He had thought he could get away with it, but in the end, he had lost just like she had. Several months passed before I saw Olivia again. She called me once, desperate to talk, but I didn't pick up. She tried again and again, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The time for words had passed. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. I had no intention of letting her back into my life. The phone calls stopped eventually, as I knew they would. And in the end, I realized that it was for the best. Olivia had been part of my past, but she didn't belong in my future. She was a lesson, a painful chapter in my life that I had learned from. One evening, a few months later, I stood in front of the mirror in my office, staring at my reflection. The man I saw was different than the one I had been before the betrayal. I had changed, and not just on the outside. The scars were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. They were reminders of how far I had come, of the strength I had found in myself when I thought I had nothing left. I smiled, a faint, almost rueful smile. The journey had been long, and it had been hard, but I was stronger for it. I had faced the worst betrayal anyone could experience, and I had come out the other side a better man. And I was ready for whatever came next.